Welcome back to the Ace Talks podcast, where we talk about Ecuador and a little more. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about this conundrum about how safe Ecuador is, or should you visit Ecuador? And it's not just a conundrum, you could even call it a bit of a controversy, because as you can imagine, as someone who talks about Ecuador a lot, I do get two specific questions most of the time, which are, should I visit Ecuador, and is Ecuador safe? And the problem with these questions, and the reason why there is this conundrum and this controversy, is because of the way people answer this question. I guess you could say the different types of answers that you tend to receive to these two questions. And I've kind of noticed that the reason why the answers to these questions are so distinct is because of the source. Where exactly you're getting the answer to these questions. Because I'm pretty sure most people go through, I guess, a main source before they end up going to different sources to get their information. And I might be wrong to assume this, but I think the first source where you get the information from is probably the travel website. It's called travel.state.gov. And I think that's probably the first source most people get their information from, because it is kind of the embassy website and it's in English. So you get the information and most people get it in a language that you can understand. So let's look exactly first what the website itself has to say. And first we have to understand how the website, how it determines its safety. I guess how it categorizes it would be a better way to explain that. So there's this travel advisory levels, which there are 4 levels of. The first one being exercise normal precautions. The second one being exercise increased caution. The third one being reconsider travel. And the fourth one being do not travel. So according to the website itself, currently Ecuador is set at a level 2. But the problem is, if you go directly and you find what I'm talking about, which I will leave a link in the description of this podcast episode, but if you go into it and read more, it'll give you a description. Ecuador level 2, exercise increased caution, reissued with updates to the kidnapping indicator and crime information in the provinces of El Oro, Manabí, Santo Domingo, Los Rios, Santa Elena, Cañar, and Carchi. If we keep reading, and I'm not going to read everything, of course, I will leave a link so you can check it out later, but some of the things here are very important for you to listen to right now. Exercise increased caution in Ecuador due to civil unrest, crime, and kidnapping. Some areas have increased risk. Read the entire travel advisory. So if we go in and we read the entire travel advisory, you'll see that it says reconsider travel to, and it'll give you a list of places. It'll say do not travel to, and it'll give you a list of places, and then it'll give you the country summary. And the country summary I really liked, I've read this already before, but let me read it now, is crime is a widespread problem in Ecuador. Violent crime, such as murder, assault, kidnapping, and armed robbery, is prevalent and widespread. The rate of violent crime is significantly higher in areas where transnational criminal organizations are concentrated. And just from that first paragraph, you get to know a lot about the very bad things happening here in Ecuador. But we're going to touch up more on that later, because you do need to understand what the difference is between what this is saying, what the difference is between what locals are saying, Ecuadorians, people who actually live here and have lived here and not just spent a day here, and then the difference between what travelers, what people who have come to Ecuador maybe for a day, a week, sometimes a month, and what they have to say. And all 3 opinions are important. I'll just leave that, I'll say that now because they are important, but we need to dive into these 3 opinions. So let's continue with what this website has to say. And something weird just happened outside. I don't know, sounds like the car just crashed. But anyways, Demonstrations occur frequently throughout the country, usually motivated by political and/or economic factors. Demonstrators routinely block local roads and major highways, often without prior notice. Very true. Past demonstrations have varied in duration, with some extending for several days or weeks. Blocked roads may significantly reduce access to public transportation, health services, and airports, and may disrupt travel both within and between cities. Outside of Ecuador's urban and semi-urban population centers, most of the country's territory is sparsely populated and isolated. First responders and U.S. government officials' access to rural and remote regions of the country is often extremely limited and can lead to significant delays in assistance to U.S. citizens in these areas. So, it also gives you some advice. If you decide to travel to Ecuador, enroll in the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, follow the Department of State on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, review the Country Security Report for Ecuador, prepare a contingency plan for emergency situations, and visit the CDC page for latest travel health information related to your travel. These are the suggestions that it gives on the website itself. And then, of course, it even goes on to say which places are level 4 and which places are level 3. So going even further into detail, which is great, but I understand it can be very confusing for some who navigate the website looking for maybe just one specific answer. And the answer would be to the question, should you visit Ecuador and is Ecuador safe? According to everything you just read, you'd probably assume that it isn't safe and that you probably shouldn't travel. But it does specify, if you listen to what I was just saying, or if you read through the website, that there are specific places where the crime is more rampant and where you shouldn't visit. And that is important because there tends to be this very big generalization of safety in Ecuador. And it's kind of hard to give advice either way, because now we're going to go into the travelers or foreigners' perspective, what they have to say typically on the situation, and where this whole controversy or this whole conundrum when talking about this comes into play. Because since I've received this question a lot, I do answer it. Of course, I have to give the answer to this question because I want you to have the best experience, and I try to give you the most detailed information that I can. But then when I give an answer, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, I'm almost always confronted with the exact opposite of what I'm saying. And it is the saddest thing that I think I ever see or have ever seen. And for example, let me just give you an example. If you go onto Facebook, just assume you go onto an Ecuador travel group, and someone asks the question, should I visit, for example, Guayaquil? Anyone who lives in Ecuador, and this is the local opinion, and my opinion as well as someone who's lived here for such a long time, anyone who lives in Ecuador will tell you, don't visit Guayaquil. I literally had a conversation with my best friend the other day while we were eating encebollado, and we were talking about the situation in Ecuador. His girlfriend happens to live in Salinas, which is going into, you have to pass Guayaquil in order to reach Salinas, Guayaquil. Sorry for those of you who hear Guayaquil and assume that I mean kill as in kill, but it's just the way I pronounce it in English, but it is Guayaquil in Spanish when you pronounce it. So when you pass by Guayaquil, you realize that it's obviously a city that, it's a big city. And I think most people will compare it to big cities in the United States and say a lot of traffic, very hot, what you would expect from a big city. But you get the opinion, and like my friend said, it is not a good place to visit right now. It's not a good place to pass by right now because of how much crime there is, how much you hear about the bad situations that are going on in Guayaquil. And we're gonna go into those in a bit. But first, just understand that you know, as someone who lives here and someone who is from Ecuador, Guayaquil is not a good place to be in right now. No offense to Guayaquil and people who live there. I hope you stay safe, but it is difficult right now. But then you instantly, and it's like clockwork. It's expected to me every time I respond a question like this to receive a comment from a visitor, a traveler, a foreigner, saying, Guayaquil is safe. I was there a day and nothing happened to me. Oh man, and whenever I see that, I understand that the person is probably saying it because that was their experience. But to give an experience like that and kind of overlook what everyone else is living through makes it kind of difficult to even answer that question in the first place. Because if a person who asks that question sees such a large disparity between those two answers, they're not going to know who to believe. And you can believe both, because in reality, both of these answers are correct in their own way. But the thing is, it's not detailed enough to really get an opinion. For example, I can say it is dangerous, but if I just say that, it is a very incomplete answer. If I tell you why it's dangerous, because this happens, because that happens, specifically where it's happening, then that's a complete answer. And then that can lead you to a more complete, opinion as to what you need to think of when you go to Guayaquil. And the same thing for the answer where it's just, it was safe because I was there and nothing happened to me. Okay, but what did you do to keep yourself safe? How did you make sure that nothing happened to you? Did you follow tips? Did you follow advice? Were you with a tour guide? Were you by yourself? Did you have a gun, which you shouldn't have? But were you safe because you took the necessary precautions? Or were you just safe walking around the streets with your phone in your hand and a camera on the other and maybe a giant backpack? Like, what made you safe? If you don't explain that, then that answer, or my answer, doesn't work. The good thing is I normally try to explain why it's dangerous in Guayaquil. I'll talk about the experiences that various family members and friends have had, the situation that's actually happening there. Like I said, we've got some things to talk about later on in this video, but you see exactly why it's such a difficult question to answer when you have such different answers to that question. But like I said, you have to be complete with the answer. And when you're complete with the answer, then you could probably listen to one or the other and understand why the situation is what it is, why I consider it to be dangerous, and why many others who live here consider it to be dangerous, and why someone who was here for a day, and I always say to myself, like, you were here a day, how can you give a complete detailed opinion of how dangerous a city is if you just probably got lucky and just didn't run into any crime? Because just to give you another example, and just in my city, a friend of mine, the day that I got my cast removed, which, shameless plug of me saying I got my cast removed, yay. A friend of mine, he accompanied me, and during the process, we were talking in the hospital, and then he had to leave because he had to go do some things at home. And during that process, he had to go pick up his brother. And the reason why he had to go pick up his brother was because his dad had gone out to go try to find his brother, because apparently around the area where his brother was at, there was a shooting. Because of course there was a shooting. You don't expect where it's gonna happen, but of course it would happen about 3 to 4 blocks away from where my friend was. Well, my friend's brother, which are both my friends. But that same fact, the fact that it could happen in that sense, just shows you how dangerous it is and how close you can be to crime without necessarily having to experience it. But if luck were to have it, and if my friend would have been right there where that shooting happened, I mean, I don't want to think about the possibilities, but you can imagine the possibilities when you're close enough to crime. And that's the situation that I'm trying to explain here with the theory of someone who's just here for a day, even for a week, saying that they didn't have anything bad happen to them. Like of course you didn't. But anyways, I don't want to go into it because their opinion is not invalid. Like I said before, you can't invalidate the dangerous opinion, but you can't invalidate the one that was safe. But it has to be more complete. You have to say how you kept yourself safe, because if not, it's not going to help the person who's coming here. But now, we move on into the second kind of problem with this situation, because it's bad enough, in my mind, it's bad enough when you have this clash of opinions where I'm telling you it's dangerous and the other person is telling you it's safe. But then there's the actual internal clash between what people who are from here have to say about safety in Ecuador. I think it's kind of crazy. and I might keep going back to that word in order to not use worse words, but it's kind of crazy because when you talk to Ecuadorians, like as someone who's lived here and has made various friendships to the level where we talk about whatever without even filtering what we say, I notice the difference between how an Ecuadorian will interact with me and how an Ecuadorian will interact with a foreigner. It is quite different. And you might not want to hear this or believe this because you might say, no, Ecuadorians are great, and they are. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not, but there is a difference in what they will tell you and interaction and what they're going to tell me as someone who has lived here and who, quite frankly, looks very Latino myself. It's very different. And the way that it's different is the various quantities of filter. And before we go into a comment that I'm pretty sure I'm going to receive where someone is going to say that, oh, it's probably because they just met you. Of course, I've even talked about this before. When people just meet you, they treat you a certain way, and then when they know you more, they treat you a different way. But this goes even further than that, because even if they knew you for let's just say like a few weeks, there's still that fact that as someone who's maybe not staying in the country, I mean, if you're staying in the country, even then, they might be kind of hesitant to tell you some things, but there seems to be this filter that Ecuadorians have with foreigners. And the filter, I understand, because it's kind of necessary to not say everything when you want someone to do something, which is bad, of course. I'm not saying it isn't, but I understand it. Marketing is all about that kind of, show them the good without exactly letting them know what the bad is. It's going to happen everywhere, and I'm pretty sure someone will comment or will agree and say that even in the States it happens, because I talk to people in the States all the time who tell me the States is in terrible condition, and I'm over here throwing flowers at the States saying that it is the safest place to me and to various people who have gone to live in the States to get a better life. So there is clearly not a good, perspective from either side. There's not an agreement where each side is saying, oh yeah, understanding that some places are bad and some aren't, which is just probably going to be the reality for every country. But the point being that basically there is this conflict of interest where people want to say that the place or the thing, because like I said, this is marketing, the thing that you're trying to sell is is the next coming of, the next thing since sliced bread. But the point is that you're not going to instantly talk poorly about the thing that you're trying to promote, because you want the person to buy your product. And in the case of Ecuador, the product that you're trying to sell to a foreigner, to a traveler, to someone who wants to live here, is a beautiful country, is a country that's not riddled in crime, is, a place that you can visit to without having to worry too much. So people will highlight the very pretty parts of the country, and that's fine. I'm not saying it's bad, by the way. I'm pretty sure someone's going to take this as, oh, Ace, why do you have to talk badly about Ecuador? And it's not that. I keep saying it, but you can't cover the problems in a country, in a product, with your thumb or with your hand and just imagine it doesn't exist. You have to accept that these things are there in order to make a difference. If you don't accept them, you're just pretty much saying, let's let them keep happening and we'll deal with it later. Which is exactly why right now we're in this whole climate situation, which I'm not going to get too into, but there was a time where we could have turned around and fixed things so that we weren't in this desperate climate situation. But we're past that point. So, hey, if it's hotter, it's our own fault. But anyways, moving on into the whole situation. So you'll get this conflict of interest from locals themselves, where they'll tell people that Ecuador is fine, that it's beautiful. I mean, highlight all the good things. It's fine, that's okay. But the problem is they don't exactly talk about all the bad things that are happening, at least when they're talking directly face-to-face with a foreigner. Because like I said, when I talk to my friends, we always come across these topics because it is what's happening in Ecuador. And what do you talk about with the people who are closest to you? The things that are happening in your life. And unfortunately, right now, I think the most interesting thing that's happening in all our lives here in Ecuador, interesting and sad, is how dangerous the country has gotten over these past few years. And to me, the perspective of danger has never really been the greatest. Like, I've never been able to say that Ecuador is 100% safe, even in the years that people said that Korea and the country was safe and, you know, crime was down. But even during that time, I mean, I saw robberies. I saw the news that, you know, bad things were happening, and things happened to people who I knew. And we'll talk about the things about, you know, me and my friends, and the things about what happened to others in a bit also. But you hear about it. So to me, Ecuador has never been completely safe, but it's definitely been much safer than it is right now. And now I think it would be a good time to talk a little bit about the things that are happening in Ecuador, because as much as you can say that, you know, there are safe places, which I'll mention them right now because those are important as well. You can say Cuenca is safe. Most of the time, everyone will say Cuenca is one of the safest cities. The same thing with Loja, the same thing with Baños, the same thing with Mindo, and of course, Galapagos. And it's funny because I talked to my best friend about Galapagos as well when we were talking about the whole Guayaquil situation. He's not even visiting Guayaquil because he's like, you just can't anymore. Not like he used to be able to visit before. But he talked about Galapagos, and he's like, that's a whole different world over there. Like literally he was like, people over there, they think that they don't have the mainland chip, which when I refer to chip, it's kind of like the mentality of being cautious with your things because it's just so safe over there. Over here, you know you can't do what they do over there, walk around with a phone, and this will remind you of the States maybe. Walk around with a phone, leave your bike, you know, outside in the open, which I know you can't do in some places in the States, but I'm saying that there are places where you can, but you can't do that over here in mainland Ecuador, but you can apparently do that in Galapagos. And it was just like, going over there, you just feel like you're not even in Ecuador anymore, which is funny because it is a part of Ecuador. So let's talk about some of the things that are happening in Ecuador. Some of the actual happenings that you probably wouldn't even know about if we weren't talking about it right now, because people don't openly talk about this. And you'll see that even in cities that you might think are safe, things are kind of messed up. So let's start first with, there was this threat, and I saw this post on Reddit, but it was taken from a Twitter, and from a Twitter post, X post. And I know you might think, oh, but you're getting your resources from there. But trust me, the things that go through Twitter, X, and Reddit are much more real and much more detailed than what you'll probably see in the news most of the time. We'll go into that in a bit because there's a comment from a friend about that. But anyways, so there was this threat that was made from the Wolves, which is the gang of criminals here in Ecuador, is one of them, of course. And the picture, it shows you the threat from these guys. And the post itself says, urgent, Fiscalía Ecuador, which was the tag, the profile of the person, denounced a threat that reached one of its officials. They will not stop the work against impunity, said the institution. In addition, he asked Policía Ecuador and Judicatura EC, both of which profiles on Twitter, to reinforce security in flagrant units. So if we go back and we actually see the threat, I had a picture of it, but just to summarize it, it's basically the band, the group, the gang, talking about how the country keeps, you know, putting away their friends, their little gang mates, and they're mad about it, so they're threatening the well-being of the people and telling them, we know where you live, we know where you frequent, the places you go to, so if you keep, you know, putting away our friends, we're going to do something to you. And if you look at the card, if you look at the actual message, it's not written the best way. And people made fun of it in the comments, and I thought it was pretty funny too because of what they were saying. But that's the situation. That's one of the things that are happening here. Then we go on to another post that I saw, once again in Reddit, but this was a video by the actual person, the journalist. A journalist was saying, if they kill me, it was Lasso who killed me. And this is a post, this was a comment by this man, Anderson Boscan, who is apparently a journalist who talks about a lot of things that people don't openly discuss here in Ecuador. Like, you don't see actual government approved, I guess you could call them, news sources talking about these things. But he talked a little bit about, apparently the whole problem is, he talked about this corruption situation with Lasso and something to do with his brother who ratted him out or who was caught in corruption. So apparently they have links to these gangs. This is not something that I can 100% confirm, of course. This is what they said, what I read, what I investigated. So, you know, if I'm in danger, you know why. But anyways, this is the whole situation that the journalist talked about. So since he's making this information public, he basically says, if he dies, you know who killed him. So yeah, that's just another problem that we have here in terms of corruption. Then we go into some news from Cuenca, which, like I mentioned in my list of safest places, surprisingly enough, there's a problem in Cuenca where 2 vehicles detonated in the north of the city. And it's not just in Cuenca, and Cuenca is actually I was actually very surprised to hear that that happened in Cuenca. But there was actually news in Quito about something similar, about the explosion of a car in Quito. So, as you can see, there are these very violent crimes, these bombs going off, and I'm actually surprised that these things happen. Once again, like, well, maybe not once again because I probably haven't mentioned this, but even I'm surprised to the level of crime. I'm used to, unfortunately, hearing about someone getting robbed, the possibility of them having gotten stabbed because they didn't want to give up their belongings to a criminal. So I'm used to hearing those kinds of things in terms of petty crime, but this is violent crime, and it's just really weird. But if we go into a bit of the explanation of that, I've talked about it before, it's probably cartel related. If we need to talk about it later, I will, but for now, just understand that this is not a common thing, but it is a thing that happens, and that's very important to remember. So then there was this problem with extortion. Actually, the problem which caused a solution. So there was this extortion going on in this water plant in Mount Sinai, and now they have armored or reinforced, they have been reinforced by the police against extortionists. To see the level of extortion go where they're like extortioning water, it's just crazy. And people have had it, because there was this post by this person who said, "Estoy que me llevan los demonios," which is basically a somewhat strong way of saying, I've had it. And he explains this, or they explain this. It happens that I live in a popular sector of Guayaquil where the water is distributed by means of tankers. And something happened in my sector that I thought would never happen. To buy water, the distributors pass through the sector and you buy it. Now you have to ask a criminal for permission so they can distribute the water without harming the tanker. And the worst thing is that the police allow themselves to be bribed. That has never happened, not even in past governments that left us the water to supply us. This has happened. This is the last straw. And the worst thing is that you can't do anything about it or they'll kill you. A sad reality, a perspective of a person living here in Ecuador. And as you can see, this is an actual thing that happens to people here. That can happen to someone here, because that's just the level of things that are happening here in the country. But people won't understand that if they just hear from someone else that the situation is fine. That's why you have to understand the things that are happening here. But let's go on, because there was another complaint from another person who said, their post was on Reddit, "I fall asleep and cars explode. Fires. They kill candidates for presidency," among other politicians. And if you continue to what they had to say, the body of everything, enough. Look, every day another problem and it gets worse. If I sleep for at least an hour, Ecuador is already in the VRGA, which here is like saying messed up in a very vulgar way. And the only thing Guillermo Lasso is doing is signing a state of exception for the 1,000th time. Or am I wrong? Maybe I'm just tired of seeing latest news. Ecuador suffers yet another attack. No more, for real. No more, seriously. Which is the person just saying, stop. And there was a response in the comments where the person basically said that they also had a family member who was almost kidnapped. So there are kidnappings, like we saw in the travel advisory in the travel site. There are kidnappings here happening in the country. And there's just a lot of more things that this person says, but basically it just all boils down to, they had hopes first that the Jan Topic, one of the presidential candidates, was going to clean up the country. They didn't vote for Jan Topic, so now they're hoping that one of these two other candidates will do something different. We all have that hope, the people who live here, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen. You can ask me 1,000 times in the comment what I think will happen if Noboa wins or if Luisa wins, but I won't have a definitive answer because you just don't know. The promises versus the reality are always so different that you just don't want to expect anything and just hope things get better. But anyways, going on to more extortion news, there was this whole situation about 56 banana exporters have been associated with drug trafficking up to 10 times in Ecuador, according to the National Police. And if you look at even more information, the National Directorate of Anti-Drugs of the police points out that behind these companies are Albanian citizens who entered the country since 2009, which means it's been over 10 years since this has been happening. And apparently it's just like, you know who these people are, you know what's happening, and you're not doing anything about it. They've just been linked, and it's like, you're not even telling us who they are, so that way we can like stop buying from them or something, if they even sell anything, because sometimes it's just a laundering scheme where the place is set up to supposedly do this, but you know, that's how they get their money in and how they do the transactions and such. But anyways, the point being that these are very terrible happenings. And I actually commented it to a friend, and what she had to tell me was that nowadays, or today, to say that you had a good time in Ecuador is a luxury, because day-to-day life in Ecuador is horrible, and the news is there to prove it. You can see it on the news, you can see it happening, and it's there. And I read a comment, because she read the stuff that I sent her, that the news does not show what things are really like. Obviously not, because the news, the journalists, they are all from the government. The government is not going to always show you the truth. And Twitter is everything. And there, they show you things as they are. Twitter has no censorship. So, like I was saying earlier with this whole Twitter and Reddit thing, you can sometimes find more reliable, or at least more news about the things that are happening here on Twitter than you can from actual Ecuadorian sources. Which is good to know, because some people might want to know exactly what's happening around the country and not just the things that the government decides to put out. Which is weird also, because they do put out some pretty gruesome things. Every time I hear my dad listening to the news, it's not good things that I hear. That's why when I check it out, I try to go prepared, because it's not good. But the point being that you can find more factual information from places like Twitter or X. You can find more factual information from Reddit. Just make sure you follow accounts or you look up things, and don't listen to a lot of the negativity that comes in as well. There's a lot of things that, you know, people don't come in to add to the conversation. They go in to add to the hate. And that's not the way that you should be, you know, interacting with these things. It's okay if you want to give your opinion, you know, criticizing something. Positive, constructive criticism is not a bad thing. The bad thing is when you go in and you're just like, oh, yeah, your opinion is bad because it has to do with a political candidate, because they always try to throw a candidate under the bus. And I get it. There's going to be people who talk about the candidates because they don't like them, and we'll probably have someone here to talk about that sooner or later, but, you know, it's not the point of why you want to find information if you're looking to visit, live in, travel to Ecuador. You just probably want to know what's happening in the country, and you don't need to hear the hate being thrown out about candidate X or candidate Y. So now, what am I trying to say with all of this? With this whole episode, what am I trying to tell you? What I'm trying to tell you is the fact that you see that there's this difference in information that you receive depending on the source that you get. You have people like me, I try to give you as much information as I can, but there's only so much I can do. There's only so many places I can visit and so many people I can talk to, and so many opinions I can get where I can't exactly give you a 100% detailed situation of what's happening in Ecuador. I will try my best to give you the most detailed information, but there's just no way for me to be here in the city I'm in, then teleport to Guayaquil, teleport to Quito, teleport to Cotogachi, teleport to, I don't know, El Oro, and give you information, and you get everything you need in one place. That's why I always recommend, if you're going to come to Ecuador, if you're going to ask the question, should I visit Ecuador? Is it safe? Don't just get it from me. Also make sure you get it from different sources. My friend Don Shader, he has his opinion of the things that are happening in Manta. You can look up Louis, Bildev Tours, and he talks about the situation in Cuenca. You can look up Amelia and JP. They talk about a little bit more generalized things in Ecuador and also different parts of Latin America. You can look at Live, Love Abroad, and they talk about Salinas, which is a little bit closer to Guayaquil. So as you can see, there's a lot of sources of information. And if you're not happy with that, you can go into Twitter, X, and you can look up the information there and actually see what people have to say. People from here, and not just foreigners, because you might not want to hear the information from us. Hear what we have to say about the situation happening here in the country. You might want to hear it directly from a person who is living in that place and living through that situation. Because that goes into another topic that I wanted to talk about, and it's the fact that if you look at my life here, if you look at maybe Don Shader's, if you look at maybe Live, Love Abroad's life, you'll notice that we don't exactly go through crime every second of the day. Like, I'm sitting here right now, and I'm giving this podcast episode, I'm talking to you, and am I in immediate danger? Probably not. Is there the possibility that a meteorite will strike down next to my house and do something here? Maybe. You can never discard the possibility, but it's not happening right now. So, am I safe? Yes. Do I think Ecuador is safe? No. Do I think every place in Ecuador is safe? No. Are there safe places in Ecuador? Of course. So you have to be very informed and do your research from the various different sources that we have here in order to get a complete opinion. Because if you just listen to, for example, the travel site, it's going to tell you level 2. And it's to take extreme precautions. Well, more precautions than you would at level 1. But it's not necessarily telling you not to visit, unless you go to the specific places, which, like I said before, there were 2 places that it did mention you shouldn't visit. Well, actually a list. With the situation with El Oro, Manaví, Santo Domingo, Los Rios, Santa Elena, Cañar, and Carchi. And of course, if you look up the article, it'll give you even more specifics, the site. But if you listen to that, and you then try to listen to what someone says about them having such a great time on their one-day trip, or if you listen to us when we sometimes, like me talking right now, I'm safe, I'm okay, I'm not necessarily in danger. If you listen to us right now, you're gonna think, I should go to Ecuador. Ace says it's safe. Yeah, it's safe in my house. It's safe here in this living room that I'm in. But if I go out on the street, I'm not gonna tell you it's safe anymore. I'm gonna tell you, as soon as I walk out of the doors of my house, I have to take precautions, because it's just, you never know what could happen. And that's what you always have to remember and come prepared for. You never know what could happen. And it even said it here in the site, have a contingency plan. Because if your trip, if the place that you want to go to, because of this whole political situation, if there's riots for some reason, I wouldn't put it past the situation right now in the country for there to be riots. I'd justify it because of how bad things are. But if there were riots, then you'd have to completely change around the things that you're doing and reorganize the way you want to do your trip. Once again, does that mean Ecuador is in immediate danger? No. But does that mean you should just come in here, walk around with your phone, walk around like you own the place? Definitely not. Don't do that. Come prepared and enjoy Ecuador, because I'm not saying it's a bad country. From this podcast episode, if you took away that I just said it was a bad country, I'd recommend you go back and listen to this podcast episode again, because it's not a bad country. there are bad things that are happening, as with most places in the world. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't come give it a chance. Come over here, take some time, visit, listen to the advisory, listen to the warnings, try to visit the safe places. If you want to visit the dangerous places, come prepared, come with a guide. Maybe don't come with a whole bunch of fancy, expensive things, and you'll be fine. So to answer the never-ending question of should I visit Ecuador, and the question, is Ecuador safe? Sure, you should visit Ecuador. Is Ecuador safe? No, but there are safe places. And yeah, this was something that I really wanted to talk about for a long time because I just keep getting that question of Ecuador safety, which is a good question. I don't mind if you ask it. I'm not saying I have a problem with the question, but I find it so hard to answer that question when I immediately get the counter answer of, oh, I was in Ecuador and it was safe. Okay, just don't forget, if you're the person who's giving that kind of answer, to talk about how you kept yourself safe in Ecuador. If you walked around the streets willy-nilly with your phone out, and what time of the day, what you were doing, who you were with, because all of these things are important. It's not just, I was safe and that's it. You're gonna give a very wrong idea to the person coming over here. So, give a little bit more information before you give this kind of answer. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you stay tuned for future episodes of the Ace Talks podcast. And make sure you take care, come prepared when you visit Ecuador. And as always, Ace out.